And when Anthony's detailing them in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I want you to appreciate that he's working within their paradigm. So he's criticising what they think the claim is versus what the claim actually is, notwithstanding that gravity, A, isn't a force, B, hasn't got a phenomena of mass attracting mass, and C, we don't live in pseudo-force space. So all those things are notwithstanding. So when Anthony discusses it, it doesn't mean he's conceding that those things are true. He's just laying out the paradigm. So I don't want to hear any crap from people in the comment section telling me, so Anthony accepts that blah, 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 insert his version of what is being claimed versus the version that's being argued. Okay, you're on.
Are we up?
Yeah. Ready when you are.
All right. So last night, midnight, I didn't watch it live. I watched it first thing this morning because sleep's paramount these days. But anyway, Rachie50 was arguing with Fight the Flat Earth and obviously he gets onto gravity. Now, she asks a very basic high school level question on F equals MA. And I was gobsmacked at the obfuscation tactics that were in play. It's a very, very simple question that she asks. And what she's pointed out is that these people, these anti-flat earthers, will obfuscate at all costs when they're cornered. And she's trying to point out to them that they substitute Newton's second law in lieu of Newton's first law. So she asks them, where do you get the A from in F equals MA? Now, what they're doing is they're calculating the force into existence because they see something accelerate. They calculate for force from it, applying the sum. And then because there's an acceleration of a mass and then they calculate the force, they claim that it doesn't matter where the force comes from so long as they see something accelerating. But the problem is they were talking about gravity. So because gravity is not a force, it doesn't accelerate and cannot accelerate mass. That's the current position in physics today, science today. But they want to apply Newtonian gravitation at all times because they want to insist that mass attracts mass, and Newton's universal gravitational theory insists that mass attracts mass. They want to apply that always, and it's not the current position in science anymore. So Newton's first law of motion states that an object in motion or an object at rest will remain in motion or at rest unless acted upon by a force. Fight the Flat Earth took massive issue with the fact that she didn't say an unbalanced force because he thinks that that's important. It isn't important, and what I'm about to show is not only is he wrong, but even if he was right, it doesn't change the position. They still need to answer the question. So what I'm going to do now, flick over to the next page. I've not used PowerPoint for a long time. So this is a screenshot where after asking the question, F equals MA, where do you get the A from? He's working out, he's trying to use a load of mathematics to get to the A, the answer, and this is what he gives us the answer. And then he insists that this is satisfying the requirements for acceleration. And Rachie's trying to get him to go back to the application of Newton's first law, which we're going to look at now. So this is taken from this particular book. It's in obviously Newton's laws of motion was written in Latin, and none of us speak Latin. And you've got to allow for a little bit of wiggle room because there might be some element of being lost in translation. But nonetheless, this is a translation using Latin, using this particular guy, Andrew Mott. You can. There's the ISBN number. You can search it. You can buy it on whatever, Amazon or whatever. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at Newton's first and second laws of motion. And throughout what I'm going to say now, you've got to remember that the point I'm making is that they substitute the calculation of F equals MA in lieu of Newton's first law of motion. That's what they're doing. They're substituting mathematics in lieu of his first law of motion, okay? So he said, Fight the Flat Earth said, he focused massively on the unbalanced force bit, and he insists that Newton said it. But this is actually from Newton's book, Newton's law of Newton's Principia, however you want to pronounce it. Every body preserves in its state of rest or of uniform motion in a right line unless it is compelled to change that state by forces impressed thereon. Now, it doesn't say unbalanced forces. And this is the final edition, right? So this is the most recent version of. He did a couple of revisions of it, but this is the most recent version of. It doesn't say unbalanced forces. So Fight the Flat Earth, when he dwells on the unbalanced forces claim from Newton, That is actually wrong. That doesn't come into it. That was substituted later. Newton didn't say it. So Fight the Flat Earth is incorrect to dwell on the unbalanced forces bit. It was substituted later on. But basically what this says in normal everyday language is an object in motion will remain in motion unless acted upon by a force. Okay, that's the first rule. So to get an object to accelerate, you have to give a force. You have to apply a force, an interaction, a push or a pull, a repulsion, a propulsion. Whatever word you want to do, there's got to be a doing word. It's got to have a verb to describe the interaction between the object that's not moving and the thing that's making it move. There's got to be something there, otherwise it won't accelerate. Okay, that's the first one. Now, what that also means is if you haven't got a force, it isn't going to accelerate. So an object at rest will remain at rest unless acted upon by a force, right? So it's not going to accelerate without a force, right? And in the second law of motion, which is what they always apply, F equals ma, it doesn't actually say F equals ma anywhere in Newton's second law. It says the alteration of motion is ever proportional to the motive force impressed, and it is made in the direction of the right line in which that force is impressed. And then it goes on to make some more. But the point is, it doesn't say F equals ma. That's simply a calculation. Now, these laws of motion essentially were superseded, or they were refined by quantum mechanics, which I'm not going to go into, but I want people to be aware that they were not right and they needed to be changed by quantum mechanics in 1925. Einstein's theory of general relativity was 1915. Let's flip back to that first one for a second, because I just want to point this bit out. Projectiles persevere, basically continue in their motions so far as they are not retarded by the resistance of the air or impelled downwards by the force of gravity. Key word that, downwards by the force of gravity. Well, we all know that gravity is not a force because Einstein changed it in 1915 when he redefined gravity. He invented a whole new geometry. He limited the speed of light to a constant and basically radicalized gravitation from the force that Newton's describing here into an effect. This is an important note, and this is a really important distinction to observe, because if gravity is not a force, there can be no effect, because you need a force to cause the acceleration of mass. This is what Rachel was asking. Where do you get that acceleration from in F equals ma? Well, there is no acceleration of mass if you haven't got a force to do it. You need a force to accelerate mass. But what they're doing is substituting a force, and they're calculating the force as though the force exists. Well, the calculating isn't going to give you an accelerating mass. You need a force to do that, not a calculation, not a load of gibberish. Doesn't matter how eloquent your equations are, be them Einstein's field equations or Fight the Flat Earth scribbling on a whiteboard. Doesn't matter how good your maths are, that doesn't accelerate mass. You need a force, not a calculation, force. So what these people are doing, and Rachel had them totally cornered, right? She had blue marble science on, and he was explaining to her how he did the Cavendish repeat, and how he was, and she basically said to him, what's making the balls accelerate? And he's saying, well, it's obviously something that looks and acts like a force. And she said, well, what force is it? And he can't answer that question. So these people will do everything to stop them from answering that question, because their answer is gravity. But as we know, gravity is not a force. It was replaced by Einstein in 1915 as an effect. Now, let's just push Einstein a couple of steps further. Einstein was verified according to science in 1919 with the observation of Eddington, where he observed the stars behind the sun. And in doing so, he validated, according to science, he validated that Einstein was in fact correct, because the observation of the stars behind the sun would not be possible unless space-time was bending, okay? So at 1919, that was verified to be Einsteinian, to be correct. That's the claim. Fast forward 100 or so years, and you've got LIGO. So mid-1990s, they started to build and got towards completing the LIGO observational thing, the Gravitational Wave Observatory. And that was at a cost of $1.1 billion. If LIGO detects gravitational waves, And it's supporting Einstein because it's gravitational waves. Newton didn't have gravitational waves. He did have changes in direction of gravity when accelerations occur, but he didn't have gravitational waves. And that's what LIGO is specifically detecting. It proves that Einstein is correct and not Newton. So it goes beyond the Eddington observation. And it is claimed that by having gravitational waves, Einstein is correct and Newton is not. And that is the current position in science today. Not that I agree with it. I don't. But that's what the current position is in science today. Why that's important is because Newton is now historical. He's not current anymore. You can't use his maths to calculate forces into existence. You can't do it because you haven't got the force in the first place applying Newton's first law to be able to do so. You have to have a force to accelerate mass. You can't have calculations to accelerate mass. And this is the point that Rachel was trying to get to. And he will not let her speak. She's absolutely right. The more she asks the question, the more irate he gets, and he starts calling her stupid bint and all the usual insults rather than address the actual question. Her point is valid. How do you get the acceleration if you've just got a mass? And the answer is, in the first law, it states that you've got to have a force. I've said it about 10 times, and I'm emphasizing it so that you get the message. What it doesn't say is that you can calculate a force into existence using the second law. It says you need a force, yeah? So when these idiots are calculating a force using F equals ma, they are substituting the requirement of a force under Newton's first law for a calculation of F equals ma under his second law. And that violates Newton's first law because it doesn't say you can have a calculation to get a force. You need a force to get a force. You need a force to get an acceleration. What they do to get around this is they deliberately conflate force and acceleration. If there's an acceleration, there's got to be a force. We agree. You haven't got a force, so they calculate that force into existence, and then they think that they've got a force. Meanwhile, in the real world, nothing's moving. You need a force to make something to move, not a calculation. I've said it 10 times. But this is the bit that our side are now beginning to get, and they're realizing that these guys conflate force with effect, because they will literally say, if you've got an acceleration, you've then got a force. But they don't say, yeah, we need a force to get the acceleration. That's the point that Rachel was trying to get to, and they would not let her get to it. So no matter what she did, he would not answer the question unless he was referring to mathematics. And that isn't the answer. So I'm going to finish with, this is where F equals ma comes from in the second law. It actually comes from his definition, right? His definition states that the quantity of motion is the measure of the same arising from the velocity and the quantity of matter conjunctly. That's what he's describing there. That's where the F equals ma comes from. So it doesn't even come from the second law of motion. It comes from an interpretation of the definition.